Youngstown, but in the Cleveland, the rest of the diocese, it typically takes about 2 to 3 months to meet with a lawyer once you initially contact our office.
Great. So now we'll do just a little bit of Immigration 101 for people who may not be familiar with the terminology that we use in immigration. So these are the main terms that you'll hear. A lot of times people who aren't lawyers use them interchangeably. We forgive you, but now you're going to learn what they mean. So there's, on these next slides, we'll go through all of these. The first one is an immigrant. So this is someone who's going to another country to live permanently. This is not you going to Mexico on vacation. This is choosing to live in another country. And you can use this term for someone who has permission, they have a green card and they plan to live here for the rest of their lives, or it could be someone who doesn't have permission to be here. There are two different types of visas. There's immigrant visas, so this is a green card, someone who's staying here permanently, and there's non-immigrant visas, which is someone who's just here temporarily. Think like a student or someone on a visitor visa. Their plan is to go back to their home country before their visa expires. A migrant is someone who leaves their country freely by their own choice. This is not someone who's forced out of their country. This could include someone who maybe left their home country because of poverty, and they're coming here just for a better life. Nobody's forcing them out. They've made this decision on their own. A refugee is a very specific term. It's someone who left their home country because they were forced or compelled. And the only people in the United States who are considered refugees are people who were designated refugees before they came to the United States. This is a very misused term. So usually a refugee is someone who's at a refugee camp in Africa. They might have lived there for 20 years, and they're just waiting for the United Nations to arrange to send them to a country that may be the United States or France or England or somewhere like that. You get this status before you enter the country. We have a little bit more information on this on the next slide. So there's a legal definition of what is a refugee. You don't need to know all of the details on this, but generally a refugee is someone who has suffered persecution. So that's, they were attacked, they were beaten, kidnapped, something really bad by the government or someone that the government cannot control. Or either that happened in the past or they fear it happening again. And the reason this person was persecuted was because of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Those 5 reasons are key to being considered a refugee. An asylum seeker, so asylum is the other side of the coin of what a refugee is. So a refugee is someone who is seeking protection because they were forced out of their country and they're given this status abroad. Asylum is something that's given from within the United States, but you have to prove the same standard. So you have to prove that you're afraid to go back to your home country because you're going to be persecuted for one of those protected reasons. Like, I can't go back to China because I believe I will be jailed because of my religion, or something like that. It has to be persecution based on a protected reason. Someone who comes to the United States and applies for asylum is considered an asylum seeker. Once that asylum is approved, they're considered an asylee. Asylum seekers don't really have any status. They are given a work permit while their case is pending, but cases can pend. I had one case that was pending for 8 years. They can pend for a very long time, and as on one of the slides that Adrian showed, sorry, the approval rate for claims in the Cleveland Immigration Court is hovering right around 13%. So a lot of these cases are denied. It's generally easier to be designated a refugee from abroad than it is here in the United States. Asylum is pretty hard to win. But once they do win asylum, if they do win asylum, they are then eligible for public benefits and can stay indefinitely and eventually become citizens. So undocumented is the term we use for someone who doesn't have a visa or any other permission to be in the United States. I think 60% of the people who are undocumented in the United States actually came on a visa and overstayed their visa. So that could be a student visa or a tourist visa. think it's 40% have entered the country illegally, but either one of those situations would be considered undocumented. On the next slide is a term, illegal alien. This is the term that's in the Immigration and Nationality Act for people who are undocumented, but we really do not like to use this term. So at Catholic Charities, we believe in the dignity of all people, and calling someone an illegal alien is not respecting the dignity of their person. No person is illegal. There's a movement to try to get this term stripped out of the laws just because it's so disrespectful.
Okay, so the term permanent resident means somebody who has permission to reside in the United States permanently, but is not yet a U.S. citizen. Permanent resident is the same thing as saying that that person has a green card. It can also be termed lawful permanent resident. So if you see green card or LPR, permanent resident, that all means the same thing. Most green cards expire after 10 years, but is the only the actual card that expires. Your status does not expire. Your status is permanent. So a lot of times individuals come to us and they say, my status is expiring, look at my card. They just need to renew their card, but their status is indefinite. Unless they do something that gets them in trouble, and then the ICE tries to put them in removal proceedings and deport them from the United States. Most immigrants must have another immigration status before they can apply for permanent residence. In order to apply for permanent resident status, they must file something called an adjustment of status application. Particularly for refugees, we highlighted refugees because we deal with a lot of refugees. They must be in the United States for only 1 year before they can adjust their status to a lawful permanent resident.
Maybe, can I just say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of people think you can just apply for citizenship or apply for your green card out of nowhere. That is not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who are undocumented desperately want to get a green card or desperately want to become citizens, but there is no path for them to get a green card. So that's just something to keep in mind. Only very limited people are even eligible to apply for this permanent resident status.
Generally, if you don't have a close relative in the United States, or you're not a victim of crime, or you don't fear persecution in your home country, there really isn't a path to get residency or citizenship in the United States. A citizen. So a U.S. citizen is somebody that is either born in the United States or is born in another country to U.S. citizen parents, or they've naturalized, right? So they come here, they have a green card, and they take the exam, and they pass the test, and they get naturalized in front of a judge. That's naturalization. To apply for naturalization, you typically have to have your permanent residency for 5 years. It's a little bit more limited to individuals who are married to a U.S. citizen. It's only 3 years for them. And you'll often see USC as the abbreviation that we use for U.S. citizens. Okay. I'm sorry for all the words on these slides. I know I broke some kind of rule here, but we're going to talk about a few changes in immigration law and policy. Last time we were here, it was February 2020, and we were under the Trump administration, so we were highlighting changes then, and we want to talk about the changes that have been made since Biden took office in 2021. I was like, wait, when did he? The first, we're going to discuss enforcement priorities. So what does that mean? So Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or the Department of Homeland Security, they cannot actively deport 12 million people at once. They don't have the manpower to do it. So they create these enforcement priorities so they know who they need to prioritize for deportation from the United States. Under the previous administration, they call for the prompt removal of all undocumented immigrants living in the United States. What that meant was everyone was a priority. Anyone that is in contact with ICE, they need to be referred to the immigration court and deported. Currently, the Biden administration changed the priorities to remove individuals who are only a threat to national security, public safety, and border security. So what we are seeing a lot of now is there's less detention of immigrants, including women and children, And the individuals that are being detained are the ones that have criminal records or committed some kind of criminal violation, have been convicted of that in the United States. The end of travel bans. I'm sure everybody remembers the travel bans that were instituted by the previous administration. They were nicknamed the Muslim ban because they were from countries that predominantly had Muslim individuals. That was rescinded shortly after Biden took office, and those bans were lifted, and those individuals were now permitted to travel back into the country. There are some issues with that. A lot of individuals are still waiting for that ban to be for the Department of State abroad to relook at their cases if they've been denied in the past, and allow them entry into the United States. DACA. A lot has happened with DACA in the last 2 years, but what is most important to know was that it was dismantled by the previous administration, and under the current administration, right now, individuals that currently have DACA or had DACA, since it was instituted in 2012, they're permitted to renew their work authorization. However, there are no new applicants allowed. So in that previous slide, I showed that there might be 10,000 individuals in the United States that are eligible in Ohio that are eligible for DACA. If you're a new applicant, you are not allowed to apply right now. It is still being defended in the courts, and we are awaiting for it to reopen to new recipients. Is this mine? Okay. So the Migrant Protection Protocol, what you may be familiar with is the similar term called Remain in Mexico policy. The MPP forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for the duration of their immigration proceedings. It made it very difficult for individuals to access their right to asylum, and many migrants were exposed to harm while waiting in Mexico. Just recently, the Supreme Court effectively ended MPP and called for the end of the court-ordered implementation of MPP in a quick and orderly manner. So as of today, individuals are no longer being enrolled into MPP, and individuals that were in MPP will be disenrolled, and when they apply go in front of an immigration judge. So this is a positive thing. This is something that happened just about a month and a half ago. So obviously there are kinks in getting all these individuals out of those makeshift tent camps. There are thousands and thousands of individuals in these tent camps over the border. So we'll see what happens there. Title 42, Title 42 is public health policy. It permitted the mass expulsion of migrants arriving in the United States at the borders without basic screening for asylum. So a lot of individuals, they're saying, I fear if I go back to Guatemala, Honduras, Cameroon, Ukraine, Haiti, I'm going to be killed for this reason, or I'm going to be persecuted for this reason. They weren't hearing it, so they were just turning them away because of Title 42. Since March 2020, almost 1 million individuals, including 215,000 parents and children, were denied access to asylum. So the Biden administration has kept Title 42 in place until April 2022, so just a few months ago. That was when the CDC announced that they no longer believed it was necessary for public health purposes. The termination of Title 42 was set to go in effect on May 23rd. However, a federal court in Louisiana blocked the Biden administration from doing so. So currently, Title 42 remains in effect following that court order. So they're still turning people away at the border because for COVID reasoning. And it's not that they have to test positive and they turn them away. They're just saying they're using Title 42 as a blanket veil just to turn them away.
So there's also been some other changes in humanitarian protection. So TPS is a big one. This is temporary protected status. TPS is a program for people, where the government decides that it's unsafe for people to go back to their home country because of some type of, maybe there's a war or a natural disaster or something. So that's what TPS is. It gives someone protection from being deported back to their home country, and it gives them a work permit. The president designates a country for TPS, and then it can be renewed and renewed and renewed every couple of years. So under the Trump administration, he tried to get rid of almost all TPS designations. So he tried to stop renewing TPS for a lot of countries. Under the Biden administration, he redesignated countries and added a few extras, including Myanmar, Venezuela, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. And there have also been changes to the qualifications for asylum. I don't know if you maybe heard about this in the news, but under the Trump administration, they issued certain decisions that made it almost impossible for anyone with a gang or domestic violence case to win asylum at all. Shortly after Biden came into office, this was overturned. Those cases are winnable again. We had a domestic violence case out of the Diocese of Youngstown win. And this has also increased the asylum approval rates nationwide from about 30% to now about 49% in the 5 months afterwards. Like I said though, in Cleveland, it's much worse.
Yeah.
So don't get excited by that. And then refugee caps. This is a huge deal, especially for our office. The president every year decides how many refugees they're going to take in worldwide, and they set a goal. Under the Trump administration, he lowered the number so low that a lot of the refugee resettlement agencies, like our office, had to get rid of a lot of staff. And then Biden came in and raised the target of refugees to resettle in the United States to about 125,000, like for this year. It's really hard to do, especially with all these refugee resettlement agencies trying to rebuild. But we are trying to bring as many people as possible, especially in the Cleveland area. We have a lot of people that we're resettling, and that includes Afghan evacuees who are not necessarily refugees, but are similarly receiving resettlement services.
Although they did raise the cap to 125,000, we are falling short of that dramatically. In the first 7 months of the fiscal year of 2022, the United States resettled 10,742. And a lot of that, as Ashley said before, is because of these resettlement agencies were just broken down and they lost staff and they need time to rebuild. And also Afghanistan happened and Ukraine happened, and a lot of the resources were put towards those individuals, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
I know we're running kind of short on time, but so we also wanted to talk about family separation, because this was in the news a lot, about children being separated from their families. This came out of something called the zero tolerance policy, where anyone who was found to have entered the country illegally was going to be criminally prosecuted and their children taken away. And reporting has shown that in the years since that this was the plan all along. The plan was to separate parents from their children for as long as possible as a deterrent to stop people from coming into the United States. There are many situations where children were separated from their parents were deported back to their home countries, and about 4 or 5 years went by without being able to reunite the families. There has been litigation and a settlement in the last few years to try to reunite some of these families, and the parents, a lot of the parents who were deported have been given tickets and a work permit to come back to the United States and given an opportunity to fight their cases, and also counseling services, because this was so traumatic for these families and the children especially. Sometimes the children forgot who their parents were. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. This was really awful, but needless to say, this has been terminated, this program, the zero tolerance policy.